Hello! I've actually got this recorded. Newfane Library, author talk. Get a little peace sign for you. We are talking about two books that I have not talked about in a long time, unfortunately. Face to Face with God. Face to Face with the... oh my god, I had them in the wrong one. Well, there's going to be a little say. Face to Face with the Reaper, Face to Face with God. My two spring novels. For those that don't know me yet, my name is Narcissia Netal. This does go by my former name. If you call me that, I am liable to look at you weird. So, yeah, I release a book a season. I publish a lot of writings at this point. I do little flash fictions, philosophical excerpts, basically whatever comes to my head. I don't restrain myself. I also do music. I do art shows. Up here, I have my art show that I'm doing with Niagara Art Trail. I'm one of the vendors there, so feel free to pick that up on your way out. But yeah, I have it up here if you want to grab one. I've also got Artisan Alley, now that I'm talking about this stuff. Artisan Alley's business card. So if you like what you hear today, feel free to pick up a business card, and you can go check out Artisan Alley, which is the local business around here that carries my books. So does Niagara Art Trail, but they're more of like an event thing at this point. Yeah, but I love them. Great friends of mine are the reason I got my start too, along with like West Coast Comics. So, that out of the way. Face to Face with the Reaper, Face to Face with God. This was the spring book. I will never write two books within a deadline again, because technically they could have been the same book, yes, but I separated them into two, because they're kind of two separate genres telling the same story. I wish I had not done two books that season, but they turned out kind of great. There's minor slip-ups, but they turned out great. These are the Lulu Press edition. I don't really like Lulu Press. If you're going to buy my books, go to Barnes & Noble. They pay me better, and the print is usually better. Lulu's fine. If you like Lulu, you like Lulu. I personally don't for my own copies, but I put it up there so people have choices. So, yeah, these are the Lulu edition. Like, they even messed up the spine, too. So, I've got a little bit of beef with them, but it's fine. So, yeah, where do I even begin? Fully illustrated by me. I did the book covers. This is probably the most I've ever done for a book cover. You know, I don't usually do that much. It used to be just like one thing in the middle. Then Christmas incorporated some stuff around it. And then from there, I've kind of decided how much art can I put in the book cover before it's too much. Maybe not the right way of thinking about it. I don't care. So, yeah. Full albums. If you know my work, there's a lot of soundtracks. I put a lot of music in there. There's full-on albums. Full vocals. There's actually a CD too. I did not make vinyls. I don't know why. Like, I didn't port it over so you can buy vinyls too. I might do that when I'm done with this. I've been considering it all day now that I know about that. The albums are basically 1 to 10% of the story, depending on the chapter. So, like, the first chapter of this book, which I'd be happy to read the first chapter, or maybe the second chapter. See how far I can get with each. But the first chapter of this book, Turned Right, would be the first song in that album, Turned Right.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, with each chapter/songs, the songs are only 1 to 10% of the chapter. Also, if you buy the books, the lyrics are in here. So, you can read along with the lyrics too. It's at the end of the book, along with the afterword like I typically do. So, yeah, I went all out with this. I never want to go all out like this again, at least on a deadline. Because doing it seasonally, I love it. Like, seasonal publishing is awesome. I love doing it because before... It was more stressful before because I'd go from one concept to the next concept. It was always constantly ASAP. The deadlines at least give me time to breathe. The issues, I can't focus for crap, but you know what? There's gains and there's losses, so I can't win at this point. I've accepted that one. So yeah, this book marked a very important turn towards actually doing illustrations, because before this book, the only book that actually had illustrations in it was my first book, Bunker. Then I just never did it again, and I don't know why. There were so many books I could have done it with, and I don't know why. But this book kind of reinvigorated that, and now when we move towards Flesh Prison, there's going to be more illustrations. So, like, for this, there's one at the end of each chapter. For that one, there's one throughout the pages. So, it kind of changed, yeah. You'll find with a lot of my work, I don't stick to a necessary format. I don't stick to, like, one idea. Like, I've done poetry. I have a romance series that's all poetry. Narrative poetry from a character named Michael Hip, the dot letters. Do not come tell me the letters. It's the dot letters. But it's a funny story because the cover says the dot letters, but it's a period. So everyone just looks at it and says the letters, and it's like, no, the dot letters. So it's going to be fun because I want to write a sequel series called The Comma Letters, and I want to see if it's actually going to call it The Comma Letters, or if they're going to sequel the books and be like, why is there two of the letters? I'm like, no, it's the comma letters. But yeah, anyway, sidetrack. I don't really stick to a format. I've done play scripts before. I love doing play scripts, so I just kind of do it all. Because the main thing, it's not genre, it's not format, it's not even books. It could be music, it could technically be art, I just haven't done too much of that yet. It's the concept and theme I'm trying to get across. When I write you something, I usually have some sort of theme in mind or something I'm getting at, something deeper. I give you a world, and this isn't necessarily me saying I want you to think the way I do. If you do, that's fine, that's great, but the overarching idea is I just want you to think. If you walk away and next day post and you're adding me and you're like, Narcissia Netal had a horrible idea here, this theme was wrong, this lesson was wrong, at least you thought about it. I mean, it'll be very interesting to hear why you responded that way. But yes, that is the most important part of my work. I do present a narrative in a way I think in my work and my philosophy, but if you disagree, you're still doing what I want you to because you at least thought about it, because you at least thought about it enough to disagree. I kind of hate, I'm going to get a little snooty here, I'd be a bit of a snooty author. I hate now in the modern industry how we're just kind of moving towards this, I almost call it like commercialism, watered down idea of just kind of passive reading. I don't enjoy that, you know. In fact, actually, I could talk about this too. A lot of people don't know this. This was a drastic change in my writing style. So the book before this was, well, there was writings before this, but the book before this was Christmas Incorporated, typical play script. Then it was A Poem for a Sorry Soul, which is technically my first manuscript. So that is my oldest manuscript. Should have a sequel involved, but I can't talk too much on that. But this one marked a style I develop on, with especially the teasers here in Flesh Prison, brutalism. Now, not my term. I don't remember who called it this, but I remember who they were describing who wrote in this style, and it is our dear friend Cormac McCarthy. Blood Meridian, The Road. Personally, my favorite is Blood Meridian just because of how uncomfortable and dark that story can be. That story is, not can be. Brutalism kind of spits in the face of modern writing, in my opinion, which there's nothing wrong with modern writing. I love indie authors. Your art form is your art form, but we exist at this time where we care more about directness than maybe the creativity we could go. Where brutalism kind of says, I'm going to trust you to understand what I'm saying, and I'm going to develop it, and I'm going to make it more creative. It can take a sentence like, the hills over there look shiny, and very much develop them with a poetic kind of epicness. It takes it more than just, the hills are shiny. It would be like, the hills laid sunrise with a congruence against the sky, as if heaven itself was staring down and observing the grassy plains. So it takes it a lot further than just a typical sentence. It may not be everyone's style, but I love brutalism in that sense because it really develops it. I started it with this book. That book does it a lot better, and it's still a work in progress, but these books started it. So, yeah. It might not be everyone's cup of tea. The one thing I've heard from some people, they'll be like, oh, well, if I read it the first time, I might not understand it. If you reread it, that's fine. I think anyone who thinks they're stupid because they don't understand something the first time around, no. You can reread it as many times. There's no one that's going to make fun of you for rereading a children's book a bunch of times. We don't understand it at first. And if they do, let me know. I'll make fun of them. So, yeah. We could talk a little bit about the blurb, too, and Tim Schultz as a character, because I feel that Tim Schultz is probably my most mature one up to this point. Probably debatable given how many characters I have in my roster, and even books I've released since the release of these two. But Tim Schultz is definitely my most mature. He is I picture him as a middle-aged man. So one thing with my characters, I never really picture how they exactly look. It's rather their personality and psychology. So it's really funny when I throw in at the beginning of the book and they describe themselves. I'll be halfway through writing the book and I'll forget what they look like. Just because it's not that important to me. What's more important is what they are thinking, what they are feeling, what are they observing, what's their mood, what's their personality. So I literally forget what they look like at at some points, and I have to go to early parts of the book to remember or remember last names. There's only one character, which is not in any of my novels yet, that I remember the last name of, and it's Austin Schroeder. He's the only one I remember the last name of. There were so many times when I wrote this book, I remember Tim Schultz. I actually remember his last name, but very rarely do I remember details like that, because again, it's the psychology of the character, how Tim Schultz is thinking, how he got in his addiction, which I'll talk about in a little bit, how he got where he was. It doesn't matter what he looks like. Quite literally, what he looks like, in my head, even describing him now, could go against what was originally in this book. He's a middle-aged man who lost his wife and started drinking. So basically, every man's a suburb. But I mean, you know, that's kind of how I thought of him, even in this current moment describing. So, yeah. Tim Schultz is definitely the most mature. To give a little synopsis on his story, he lost his wife to, I think it was lymphoma, but basically cancer. He lost her to cancer. And he delves into a deep alcoholism and addiction and just kind of spirals down. And when I wrote this book, I really wanted to talk about his addiction and his alcoholism, separate from what this book talks about afterwards, the after scene that you have to talk about with this. But alcoholism was a major part. So when I tell people in passing, this book is about tragedy, grief, and addiction, but the grief also comes from the loss of self. When you are addicted to something, whether it be something like drugs, which is more common, or sex addiction, or anything like that, you do inherently lose yourself. There's a death of self, a death of ego. You've lost yourself. You have less of a conscience per se. Not saying that in a negative sense, rather in a more philosophical kind of mental sense. You lose that sense of self as you go further down this addiction. And it feeds this cycle, because you're doing something that in the moment feels great, but is self-destructive. You're constantly destroying yourself. You're basically killing yourself. It's a slow form of suicide at that point. At least mentally, philosophically, all that stuff. So that's one thing he actually grieves in. I think that was a really clever choice looking back, because he's not only grieving the loss of his wife, Sanctity, but he's grieving the fact he lost himself in that death too. Because I think what's really interesting at this point of time, I've kind of realized, even with my aunt recently passing away, not that I feel any way on that, but that's a separate conversation from here. I listen to the song Linnea Side. So when you lose someone, I don't even think it's them that you're mourning. It's rather the memories you have with them. And that's not me calling people egotistical, although you could argue that for separate reasons. It's rather that as human beings, we all see ourselves as the main character. I mean, think of how many people say, oh, we're people watching, how many the other lives. We don't think of that, and that's not necessarily bad. As a primal ape, kind of, that went into an evolution where we're now like little fleshy humanoid figures, you know, I think we kind of forget that idea that we are kind of the main character in all our stories. I mean, when I walk away, I'm seeing this from my perspective. I know how I'm thinking, but other people are going to walk away from this and have a completely different feel. We're all the main characters in our story, and I don't think we admit that. So relating that back to even Tim Schultz and the loss of death, we kind of lose ourselves in it, because every moment we spend with that person, every moment we have with that person is actually what we're grieving. We're not with, unless you're like married or your children, you're not with them all the time. You don't know. When you walk away, you know, when it's like your aunt, for example, when you walk away, that person could go back home and you'd have no idea what they're doing. It's both terrifying and also very interesting. So it really, in death, you are grieving the parts of yourself you gave to them, whether inadvertently or literally. And I think that's why it was important, especially within this book, for him to grieve himself. He didn't just lose Sanctity, he lost himself, rather through the addiction and through that death. So, yeah, which also could talk about survivor's guilt, which I would say he has to a degree, but that wasn't the main focus here. So, yeah, I'm using a lot, so yes, I'm a terrible public speaker. But he's a very interesting character, because even starting out his story, the beginning of this book, which I'd love to read maybe the first or second chapter, but I'll have to do it for this one too, because I have to do everything equally. He's an alcoholic who drinks and drives. So what's even interesting about that is, morally with my characters, although I can agree some are more evil than others, pending, I don't ever want you to label them as good or bad. They've got reasons for both. Every reason for a narcissist in one of my stories to do what they do is not because they're a narcissist, but the enablement of that behavior. So with alcoholism, the enablement being the fact that he lost his wife, the fact he loses himself, all of this mourning, grief, and tragedy that he has to numb to feel alive in. But even then, that's still killing him. So in the beginning of the story, he's drinking and driving, and he slams headfirst into a car. The beginning of the story, he's bleeding out on the pavement, dying. So he dies within the first chapter of the story. The death of the character happens. Everything else takes place in the afterlife, and he kills a father and son. So objectively, morally, this entire story, you could already start by saying he's a bad guy, but all the other chapters from that point till the end of the second book, you understand the reasoning why. There's actually a chapter in here talking about redemption, because this book is the more darker, like, okay, he's lost himself, he's got to learn the reality of what he did. He not only has to come face-to-face with the Reaper, but face-to-face with himself, but he also wants to redeem himself. And there's a chapter in here called The Amalgamational Machine, where he meets the father and son. So I actually will mention that for a second, even talking about morality within my characters. When he meets this amalgamation machine that has become the father and son in this metaphorical kind of afterlife sense, the father doesn't even say, I'm going to forgive or forget you, but I'm going to spare you, and you better live a life that was better than you had. Which is a separate kind of philosophy, I think. But, yeah. One other thing I will mention, because I've had this question a lot. These are not Christian, they're not religious. I kind of use symbols, however. A lot of my work, I use a lot of different religious symbols. I guess I would describe myself as atheist, but I don't really subscribe to any religion at all. I just kind of throw in symbols because I think that a lot of religious stories and religious gods and even Judas or Jesus or all of that can have a really good symbolism in a story in both a negative or positive sense, depending on how you want to use it. It's probably the most overused and known symbols you can use, but I kind of love them. So even within this example of death being this book and life being this book, they're not rooted in any religion. It's kind of this made-up thing I came up with, which isn't even a religion itself. It's just kind of made up for the point. And the reason I bring this up is because in a lot of stories, death, Hades, all these figures of death are always a bad guy. The Reaper is not a bad guy in this story. At least I didn't portray him to be one. Him, her, she, not really subscribing to any gender. The Reaper's job is very simple. Show you what you have done, give you whatever choice of your afterlife. That's which is originally in any older pantheon, that was Death's purpose. Death wasn't here to be a bad person. It's kind of like getting paid to do the job nobody wants to do, and Death is just sitting around like, everyone's going to hate me, but I got to do what I got to do. So, yeah. He's not necessarily bad. Could there be argument for the methods he uses within this book? Perhaps, but that's not really. I also bring this up for the God character, who, even herself, who's more portrayed female in the story, God describes herself as everything and nothing. So what's really fun, if you want to talk about morality, is that God herself does not reflect a positive, necessary thing. She's not a villain. But in the middle of the story, she basically tells Tim Schultz, I don't have to care whether or not you're good. I'm simply doing this for entertainment. Because in this whole analogy, God represents creation itself. And creation itself is neither good nor bad. It's technically both at once. So within even the concept of having to describe that was hell. Because you have to portray basically an oxymoron. Because as good as this God character, the creator character, is in the story, that also means as evil as they can be. They're literally just everything and nothing. So it's quite literally the most indescribable thing that you can do. It's hard to describe. Any description I could make now would technically also be false and true. That's how weird it is. kind of hoping not to do that again. I probably will, but yeah. Some other fun things. I'm kind of talking more about the first book. I'll get to the second book because it's a little different. This is a psychological thriller. So while this one's an existential thriller, this one's going to focus more on your psychology, your mental illness, your addiction. It's going to focus more on that. We're rooted very much in human condition and what led here, which is very important to why this one's an existential. What's some other fun stuff I could talk about? Fun fact, if you keep up with the story, there is the cycles of grief. That is something inadvertently said. He doesn't necessarily say it out loud to a certain part, but he does go through the cycles of grief in this. It's not said directly, but I did purposely do that. I feel like if you write a story with death and you don't do the cycles of grief, you've done it wrong. So, no, I'm joking. But I do feel like that's kind of an expectation when I wrote this, so I did. Yeah. Is there any questions thus far that I can answer? Does anyone have any questions at all?
What do you like reading for fun?
That is a complicated question. All right. I will mostly enjoy anything to a degree, but I definitely have a preference. I have enjoyed everything from philosophy to, there's maybe one or two romances I read that I actually enjoyed, Water for Elephants being one of them, but I tend to find myself going back to older literature. Not to sound like that person, I'm only 19, but I happen to like 1900s to 2000s writing. So it's really funny, because if you had asked me maybe 5 months or 6 months ago before December, I haven't read in years. I don't enjoy, here's the thing, I don't enjoy a lot of modern writing. A lot of my indie author friends, like Mike X. Welsh, Brie Evanhart, they actually do write in a way I enjoy, even if it's not the typical taste you'd expect me to enjoy. I do enjoy their writing, but I'm very picky. And it's kind of a problem, because my friends, every friend I have, will send me their writing and be like, can you review it? And if I don't like it, it's a really hard thing, because I'm very blunt, so it's like, how do I tell this person I really didn't like their story without being an absolute jerk? But again, if you're my friend, I'm going to be honest with you. So I just have to find a way of doing it where I'm not jerk. So to answer your question, I enjoy anything that makes me think. I enjoy something I can't predict, which is really weird for someone like me. There was a lot of works, Harry Potter came out, became really huge when I was a kid. Warrior Cats. I didn't enjoy that. I'm not even joking, I was a 15-year-old watching obscure indie horror games and reading Karl Marx in my bedroom. That's what I was doing. All the other kids, they were watching friggin' Jacksepticeye. Nothing wrong with Jacksepticeye, I've actually come to love him. But they were watching like Markiplier, and I'm sitting back, I've got friggin' Vosh playing, and I've got Karl Marx, and I'm like, yes, I am highly educated. I wish I could go back and slap 15-year-old me. She started some right things, but she needs a good slapping sometimes, with some things I remember I did. I kind of have to sit back and be like, damn. Yeah. So, yeah, I look back. That's a
rite of passage right there.
Yeah, I look back to teenage me, and there's a lot of things I love that she did, but there's a lot, it's the mentality I love, it's not the execution. Because me and her are not so different, it's the fact that I've matured enough that I can do it. So it's even evident, one mentality I have hugely that you can see with these books and even talking about it, is the huge F you, I'll do it anyways attitude. And I always tell this story when I'm talking about this mentality. I was in Newfane Middle School, and there was a poem I wrote called Sniper. It was an analogy for how people will vicariously watch the television. They don't care who's suffering. It's like a sniper on their post. I remember, I forget which teacher it was. It was a man. He ended up going from middle school, and when I was in 9th grade, he went to high school. I forget why. It was a huge drama thing I didn't care for. So it got taken away from me. And they were like, oh, you can't write a poem about snipers. And I'm sitting there, and it's like 15-year-old me, and I'm like, I'm going to write something darker now. I forget I don't even remember. I don't even remember the wording of either poem or what. Like, I would love to rewrite it just for crap and giggles, but I remember I wrote something so dark afterwards that people were like, why? So I love the attitude that I've had since then, but I've since become a lot more mature about it. And I've also accepted constructive criticism and actual criticism. I do feel that younger me could have done a better job on that, but when you're a 15-year-old who wrote their first manuscript and other 15-year-olds are talking about the way girls look and men look, you do kind of feel like you have a superiority complex. So, yeah, that's what I mean by I have to slap 15-year-old me. 15-year-old me was different and probably had some traits of which you could denote some sense of like higher intelligence for that age. Not that I would agree or disagree with that. I don't feel like I should. I feel like that'd be egotistical. But 15-year-old me definitely was a I'm trying to find a great way of saying this that's not taboo. Definitely a harlot for attention. She that's the best way I could put that in here. She definitely would get praise, and then she'd be like, yeah, I'm better than everyone. And I kind of wish I went back as like me now and just kind of looked at her and be like, you're not, shut up, you're annoying. Keep writing that, though. That one's good. Shut up, though. But we all have those moments. And that goes heavily into even the theme of this book. I'm going to relate it back to that. Is that theme of self-acceptance that I actually talk about heavily in a second. So, yeah. Some recent stories I will talk about. The major one, and everyone who knows me, I kind of have an obsession with this story. Harlan Ellis, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. I did a whole album based on that. Love that story. That is a great example of horror justified. Within horror, we have this issue right now. It's been an issue since I was a kid, where they will just show scary monster, or blood and gore, or here's Jason again for the 15th time. Horror doesn't come from fiction. It doesn't come from just showing like this really violent scene, this really essay. It doesn't come from that. If you're going to show a violent scene or essay scene, what makes it terrifying and respectful, which I'll talk about later, is when you portray it in a way that you can understand the psychology of the characters. Notice I didn't say justify, understand. If you can understand what leads someone there, it becomes 10 times more terrifying. I'd like to bring up 2 comic book characters. I'm not much of a comic book reader, but they're great examples of this. Thanos and Joker. You understand these. It doesn't mean they're right. You don't agree with them. But you can understand their concept. And we also have an issue with sympathetic villains, but that's separate. But yeah, horror has had that issue for a while. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream doesn't have that issue at all. 1960s sci-fi horror story, and you can understand why he thinks the way he did. And there's even arguments I have made when someone asked, can you justify what Am said? And I said, I wouldn't say I necessarily think he's justified, but he can justify it. It's just not a very comfortable argument. He represents something so powerful within that story that I love how Am's portrayed. It's a very uncomfortable story. I personally love the audiobook version of it. I love Harlan Ellis and how he portrays Am. It's very uncomfortable, but it's justified in the way it talks about it. And that's what I strive to do with my horror. Even with the 2 teasers I have, I understand what I write about can be very uncomfortable. This book's probably a lot lighter, along with Christmas Incorporated, than my normal writing. This is a lot lighter than I normally go, typically, because it has to be justified by the concept. The main goal here isn't necessarily to terrify you. There are horror elements, but it's to make a point on that and make these themes known, while something like Flush Prison with Jessica's chapter, it is to terrify you. I want you uncomfortable because the reality I'm talking about is a very real reality in a rather more exaggerated way. So I love I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. I love Blood Meridian. I have not had a chance to full on read it, but how many video essays I've watched on my phone probably would concern people. I love that story. To flip it to like some philosophy, I've really enjoyed Nicholas Machiavelli's writing. I've enjoyed a lot of amoralist writing, which is a concept I love heavily in my books. I even just stated how to think of my characters. Amoralism isn't necessarily anti-moralism. Amoralism is the idea that morality doesn't exist. It basically says societal morality doesn't exist. There's no such thing as morality. It's a made-up concept. And even when you talk about characters like Judge Holden or Am, they embody this in a negative way, but even anti-heroes embody this. Like, technically they're doing the right thing, but they're not necessarily doing it in a way that we all agree. And one of my biggest examples of proving amoralism, if I was to ask you, if murder is wrong, what would you say?
I mean, depends, right? Because literally. If someone's going to attack you first, it's self-defense,
yes,
right?
Yes, but most people,
yeah.
I love that response.
Yeah.
It's the first time someone has said yes.
Yeah.
Or it's the
I
first
suppose
time.
murder, because there's like the justice in the court term for murder versus like the street term for murder. Right?
Yes, but in general, murder is taking someone else's life. So most people would say that's wrong. Now, one of my favorite points to bring up with this, I'll be like, okay, do you support any war? Do you support defending yourself? Well, yeah, of course. If they attack me, I would kill them. Well, that's murder, isn't it? So one of my biggest points of amoralism is a very uncomfortable subject because it forces you to come to terms with yourself and understand you're neither righteous nor not. So that's why I love writings like Am, or even writings of Nicholas Machiavelli. It's how I strive to write. I never necessarily want you to look at a character as good as bad. Tim Schultz, indirectly through the ignorance of his actions, kills a son and a father. You could argue off the bat he's a bad person, but then you get the explanation of why he does what he does. And even the father doesn't necessarily forgive or forget him, but kind of says, I will let you slide on the fact that I understand, but keep in mind I want to kill you right now. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting. I think this is a point I've made with moralism as a philosophical debate. If you ever want to test someone if they're narcissistic, get into a moral debate with them. Get into a moral debate with them. I really hate that I've proved this point because it was originally a joke. But people who look at me and tell me they're a good person, they're an empath, I've found they're not. They're the same people who look at you and say they're an empath and they're drinking Starbucks from 2 underpaid workers and they just stepped over a homeless man like he's a corpse. Yeah, I literally, no. And it's the same point I even make on myself. I don't necessarily want you to think of me as a good or a bad person. Let my actions speak for myself. Have I done things that are probably terrible? Yeah. I mean, 15-year-old me had a way with words that I do, but 15-year-old me didn't have the facet to be like, hey, I probably shouldn't say it to someone. So that's kind of my point. I think that anyone who declares himself as either bad or good is completely just stupid in the first place because we're all little effed up little creatures on this planet. That's the way I like to say it. There is not one person in this world who has not had an effed up thought once. And the difference is being able to accept it from being able to look me in the eyes and be like, I'm an empath, while you just abused a worker because they didn't get you your coffee on time. You know? So, yeah. A lot of people would not like what I just said. You're right to feel that way. However you want to feel, I'd love to hear the critiques, comment them below, I guess. So, yeah. Getting back to the book, kind of a side rant, sorry. I do love a good rant, though, as long as I can present something to think about.
Can I ask you a question
Yes.
about your book?
Yes.
So,
sorry.
are these two the only ones you published already?
No. It's
bunch?
really funny. This is
Okay.
probably the most I've promoted for a book. I hope to do the same with Flesh Prison. I technically have, I'm going to say 23 published works.
Oh my
because,
God. Okay.
Because I will publish flash fictions like ebooks. So you can buy them for like $1. And then I have free work. And then, so it really depends.
Okay.
Yeah, so 25, we're going to say 25 published works. But in my head, and I've probably said this for a while, I'm not really sure, probably 8 to 9 books.
Okay.
Actually published. But then that's not even getting into manuscripts. So it's a complicated question. So I usually tell people published works, but keep in mind they're not all books. The other thing that's really weird, as you're an author yourself, love your work, I don't measure words. I kind of feel like an idiot for not doing it, because typically in the author world, it's like I just reached 30K words. Pages are more important to me. And the reason why is because my books have illustrations, they have different formatting, the pages are more important to me. Like you can have 30,000 words, and that's fine. That's a great book, or 40,000, or 90,000. But even then, if you have, a page with 500 words and illustrations, what is the important? It's still as important as if you had 10,000 pages or 10,000 words on that page. To me, the point you're getting across, the purpose. A lot of people disagree with me on that, and I'd actually like to hear the arguments on that. I have yet to hear someone disagree with my take that pages are more important. I would love for someone to, because I actually want to think about the other side. I just haven't been able to. I'm
only just saying that I took a creative writing class in high school, and I got dinged on a report because I did hit the page number, but I didn't hit the word number, because in some ways it was formatted in what is it, a postulary or something, right? It's a series of letters.
We're not
and
even
things.
getting into formats right now.
Yeah, so
No.
I did get some points off because even though I hit the page amount, I didn't hit the word amount, because it was a series of text messages and blog posts and stuff. From a band that was on tour. So I guess a teacher will absolutely argue with you. But I think maybe their point is, if this person wrote 1,000 words, but I only wrote 500 words, but we had the same page, I did less work than that person.
So I did have some creative writing projects to which there was a word count. But my teacher was a lot more chill about it. I went to a different school. I went to Newfane High School. I technically graduated, but I spent 3 years in Niagara Academy, which was hell. Love my Niagara Academy teachers, but it was hell.
What's Niagara Academy?
See, I can't say a normal joke right now because I have to be professional. So Niagara Academy is kind of like a special education program, but not to the degree of you see in the movies these kids with disabilities, being blind, intellectual disabilities. It's rather more of a mental health thing. And
like an alternative?
Kind of, yeah. I love Niagara Academy. I love the teachers. My fellow students I have a lot of petty issues with, and just to show my issue with it, Yeah, to a degree. There's only one that I still talk to, and even then, we talk here and there, and I love them, but I don't. Niagara Academy is weird for me because the teachers were awesome. The kids, I don't know. I can't judge kids. Because the same things I could leverage against them, I could leverage against myself. So I can't really make that. I can't make any clues. It just was a kind of weird, kind of toxic environment, but kind of not, because I kind of disassociated from it. But that's how every school is. And if I'm going to give Niagara Academy a lot of praise on the fact of how they handled the kids, the great school therapists, they did a lot of great things. It's just, I think the reason why I say it's hell is not because of that specific school, but the environment that schools have now. So I don't think it's a Niagara Academy issue, it's rather a nationwide issue. I kind of say the same thing of when people critique Lockport. When you go into Lockport, there's drugs, homelessness, all of that. It's not a Lockport issue, it's a nationwide issue. It just happens to be prevalent in places like that. And I think that's kind of the point I'm making with Niagara Academy. It's not Niagara Academy itself. Great teachers, great program. It's the only reason I really graduated, even if I have different feelings on how much it's worth. They did a great job. So, yeah. So I did go to school to Niagara Academy, and I was an author back then too. It's actually really funny. I skipped college. I had a full scholarship to swing at.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a really funny story. But what was your original question? Did I answer your question? I'm sorry.
You did, but I have another question.
All right, hit me. I might do a lot of side ranching. It's because even as an author, I do this, where if I say one thing, I also have to explain it. So I try to give you everything, but it might not be the most helpful. So keep asking your question. Sorry.
So when you're writing, do you base your characters on real people, or are they completely from your imagination?
So typically, there's three things. It used to only really be two. It was psychology. I am ADHD, and my special interest is psychology. So when I say psychology, I also lump in religion, philosophy, and politics. In my head, and there's probably some pretty healthy disagreements we'd have with this, but in my head, psychology is overarching for everything and it encompasses everything. This was one of my points when I wrote some of my first books. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to murder their wife, There's an overarching psychology that has to be understood. Not necessarily justified, just understood. So, which is kind of weird and uncomfortable to even say, but I have to play devil's advocate. So when I write, it comes from a place of psychology. So a lot of my characters, even as I said, I don't think of how they look, I think of how they think. What trauma have they gone through? What have they gone through? Did their father used to punch them every time they... Stuff like that, which is probably a more violent, extreme example. But what leads Tim Schultz in this story to becoming an alcoholic? Well, let's see, he lost his wife, he's grieving that loss, he's grieving this. He doesn't know necessarily how to face his emotions, which he tells you, so he uses alcohol. The other thing is all of my important characters, it used to be all of my characters, but rather important, have some piece of me. So... I have lived a very weird life where I have been on the sides of everything. I want to, before I go further, I have never laid my hands on someone, I have never sexually abused someone, I've never done those two things. However, I have been in both the abuser and the abused role, and I am not proud to say that, I am rather admitting that. I have been on every side of every coin, so when I write, I try, with my important characters, to grab some piece of me and put it in there. So... Tim Schultz is definitely that grief, that feeling of loneliness. I've been through addiction too. I was in 9th grade abusing pills. That's not even a joke. A lot of people don't know that. I've been through that addiction. I've been through self-harm addiction. So that was kind of funneled into that character. The grief of losing someone. I've lost a lot of people in my life. So that's definitely Tim Schultz. Sancti also has the wife who does make an appearance. What I will say on that is, since it is in the afterlife, any characters you see other than the Reaper, God, and Tim Schultz, I'm actually going to tell you, debate if they're real or not. I'm not going to tell you whether they are or not, but debate if they're real or not. It makes the story a lot more interesting. So Sancti, debate if it's actually Sancti or if it's not. That's all I'm going to say. So Sancti, funneling in her was kind of like the caregiver side of me, this and that. God, what I had to funnel into the creator and the God was actually my child side of me, where it's kind of like, I don't really give no, because I just want to have fun. So I kind of funneled that a little bit into her. The third kind of thing is I've met a lot of people in my life to where I've understood their psychology, and I can funnel that in too. So it's kind of a mix of all those three. So typically, how I'll explain it is my main characters have some part of me, usually, but side characters and perhaps antagonists have other traits that I've noticed, but they all have some sort of psychology. Especially mental illness. That has a huge role in a lot of my stories. And I actually want to say something here that I've made a point on a lot. When I talk about mental illness in my books, if you have a character that is evil and does something wrong and is a narcissist, it is not the narcissism that makes him evil. Do not think that way. I portray my characters, and I try to portray mental illness in the way I think of it. No disorder makes you necessarily a bad person. And I've seen this. I've met people who are psychopaths and who are actually really good people. Like, they're decent people, which is really surprising. It's really weird to say. But it's the enablement of that behavior. We have a society that enables a lot of selfish behavior. A lot of behavior that's antisocial. We don't have the proper supports. So it's really weird because with this point, I've actually come to the realization that technically with my own philosophy, you could have a narcissist who's a good person. Mm-hmm. My father is a narcissist and extremely abusive. So it's weird to say. Like, it's really weird with a lot of my characters. I have to play devil's advocate, and I kind of hate it. So, yeah. Do you have any other questions so far?
So you've been writing for how long?
If we want to be real, I'll give you a couple of dates. So because it's weird. Mm-hmm. If we want to be technical, I've been creative writing since I was 12. I wrote my first manuscript when I was 12. It was called Earth's New Rule. It's probably on an old laptop, of which I don't even know if that laptop works anymore. I'm going to say I've kept that concept in my head, but I've not rewritten it, nor will I publish that manuscript.
Okay. Because my follow-up question is, you talked about how much you've grown since you were 15. Would you ever consider, or maybe you have gone back and reworked something you've already written?
So that's a really funny question.
Okay.
This was the second thing I was going to talk about. When I was 15, I wrote a manuscript called The Bat, the Child.
The what?
The Bat, the Child. It was going to be this huge fantasy world with different stories and all of that. That manuscript's in my room. It's in a box and copyright. And I do plan on, in the future, revisiting. That concept I like. Earth's New Rule, I wouldn't mind returning to it. It just needs a huge rehaul. So I never necessarily shelve a concept. Actually, this is evidence of that. In a second, I can talk about that. But I've been writing since I was 12. I've been doing art since I was 12. I've been doing music since I was 12. It's been in my blood. It is my blood at this point. I bleed for my art. Not literally yet, but so with my art too, I push the boundaries too. But if we want to be real, I've only really been published for about a year now, April 15th last year. And I'm going to call that official publishing, but I've technically been professional. I'm going to use professional very lightly here. Since I was 14, putting out ebooks that you can still get, call it typical life. Eat that ebook, don't get it. But I've been writing for a while. My writing style has changed. Even if you, as I talked about, even if you read from these two books to that book, very different. I really like the direction I'm heading in now, but it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone. My writing style very much changes, also depending on the context. A great example today, I was writing a paragraph for Flesh Prison. Flesh Prison is very fancy. It's very poetic. This paragraph is not, where she's murdering someone. It's very direct. I kept the sentences as least descriptive and short as I can, but that adds to the horror. So it really depends. I play with my writing style, but I'm moving in the brutalist sense. I like doing that. That I enjoy. Some people may not like it. I don't like that. No, I'm joking. But they can feel how you feel, you know? As long as you read it and you thought about it, even if you disagree, I'd love to hear the disagreements. I'd love to see how I can improve. I don't want to argue per se. Not necessarily to a degree. Debating, yeah, which has kind of become like a naughty word. If you disagree, I would love to hear why.
Well, it's a naughty word because people abuse it and use it to their own ends versus what it is in spirit. I think that's It's a sad world we live in where you can't look someone in the eyes and say your writing's terrible. Well,
really?
You should at least give some.
Be nicer, but yeah.
Maybe not start
You have to
with
at
that.
least explain why you think it's terrible.
Yeah.
Like, because if the person, you're terrible, but what is terrible about it is
that's my point though.
But
we just can't be honest with each other.
Yeah.
So even within my own work, I try to be very honest. Like, there's actually a scene in this book where he technically I'm not going to say he would have succeeded either way if he went through with it, but he technically attempts suicide in this book. Called, if I remember the chapter, I'll give you the chapter because it's one of my favorites. I'll see if I can find it. It's the 5th chapter, if I remember. Song-wise, it was really fun producing. It was three different genres in 3 minutes. Really fun. Oh my God, give me the damn Crossing Destiny. So yeah, that's really, really another thing I could talk about is as a horror writer. This is a question I got asked a little bit ago by a 13-year-old who writes like Stephen King. Met this. I actually have to email him a flash fiction because he participated in something I was doing. But he asked me, do you ever get disturbed by your own writing? That book especially, yes, but sometimes I do. And I feel like if I didn't, I'd be more concerned. So yeah, I understand what I write. I understand the nature of it, but I definitely do disturb myself a little bit. So yeah, my camera's about to die. I can look at the battery right now. So I'm going to end the video recording here.
Yeah, it's 6:45, we close in 15
Is it
minutes.
6:45?
I think it's a good
Okay, so you want to wrap it up?
I think
Okay.
it's a good time to wrap it
Okay,
up,
that
yeah.
sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Come down to the Newfane Library. Come pick up some books. Support your local libraries. They're important community events where you can portray people even as abstract and weird as me, but you can get a lot more experiences. If you want to buy my work, it's down below. My name's Narcissia Netal, author, artist, musician, caffeine fiend, whatever I decide tomorrow. You have a good one.